Welcome to this YouTube channel, Bhagwan Ki Baatein, where in the ongoing series, we are talking about stories from the lives of great saints. And we are currently on some of the episodes from the great life of Sant Kabir. In the last capsule, we ended the story, or rather, we paused the story at the point when Kabir was sent by his mother with the woven cloth which Lord himself had woven for him to the market to sell and get some money. And we saw how every merchant in the market, in the bazaar, was seeing that garment as so invaluable. They were seeing it as double the value that it possessed. And at the fag end of the day, almost every merchant was disappearing, leaving the market, thinking that they cannot afford this. Let's see what happens next. And Kabir quickly arose and went and sat inside and continued his worship of Ram with love and affection, just as a daughter-in-law hides herself, saying, "My mother-in-law will treat me roughly." So Kabir, out of fear of his mother, sat alone in his deserted house. Or just as when Dhruv was kicked by his mother and sulking went into the forest, so this Bhakt Kabir became indifferent to worldly things and went and sat down in this vacant house. Just as sannyasis attain their highest order by abandoning every form of action, so Kabir became indifferent to his domestic affairs and sat down in this vacant house. The servant of Vishnu, having entered this deserted house for that purpose, the pervader of the universe, seeing his devotion, came to test the truth of it. He took the form of a very aged Brahmin with old and torn clothes. The cold was intense, just as it is in the months of Posh, which is January, and Magh, which is February. In order to test the generosity of Kabir, the life of the world entered shivering as he sat there worshipping. This Brahmin arrived. Just as the son of Gadi arrived to give trouble to the king of Harishchandra, or as the lord of Kailash, assuming the form of a guest, came to trouble Shriyal, or as Muni Durvasa, having heard of the goodness of Ambarish, came to trouble him, or as when God, assuming the form of Vaman, came to test Bali with his own eyes. In that way, this Brahmin spoke to Kabir in a distressed voice. "I am old, helpless, and poor. I have no clothes to wear. You are the Bhakt of Vishnu and exceedingly generous. It is intensely cold. If you have any garments, give me some." As the dweller in the heaven of Vaikunt said. Thus Kabir thought to himself, "If I say no to this Brahmin, it will be to the harm of my desire to be good." So he tore his scarf in half and gave one piece to Brahmin. Kabir then, full of love, continued his worship. Krishna then put on this garment and came immediately outside. Then he thought to himself, "I will go in again and see what's happening." Thus saying, Krishna became a fakir in the guise of a Mohammedan. His head was adorned with mass of hair. On his feet was an ornament made of crystal. Carrying in his hands a rosary, and opening wide his bloodshot eyes, the cloud-dark one rushed violently into the house to test the truth about Kabir. When gold is seen to be dimmed in luster, it is rubbed on a testing stone. Or when a coin is suspected of being false, it is forcibly punctured by an instrument. Or when a valuable diamond is under consideration, the expert hammers it on an anvil. So God became a Mohammedan fakir in order to test the mind of Kabir. In a violent laughter, he stood at the door and called Kabir. He said to Kabir, "Give me at once a garment. God is without form and without qualities. You've forgotten this. Why do you leave him and worship Ram?" Hearing this harsh voice, Kabir replied in soft tones. He said, "To be without form and at the same time possess qualities Both can exist without any difference between them. If butter is hardened or melted, it does not thereby lose its character of being the butter. Or when an ornament is made of gold, it does not thereby lose its luster. So the unmanifested, eternal being was taken form. The pervader of the universe has assumed visible form for the purpose of his bhaktas. To these words of noble Vaishnav, the fakir said in reply, "If you've got any garment, give it to me quickly." Kabir hastened to remove the scarf, the other half of the scarf rather, which remained with him, and gave it to the fakir. He then continued to sit there without any concern, and the fakir hastened away. Just as when the rainy season had passed away, the sky looks clear, or as when the soldering is tested, it turns out to be brilliant gold. Just as when the Python has left the Mount Maila, or as when Rahu has let go the moon, so Kabir sat down to his worship with quietness of mind. Or as the water of Ganges appears clear after the flood has ceased, or as when the Mount Mandara has drawn out of the ocean, its roar ceased. So the concern which Kabir felt when no customer appeared for the purchase of the scarf disappeared from his mind. Kabir was now in a state of joy. So thus satisfied in his mind, he sat worshipping Sri Ram. The life of the world, hearing this, did something which you must listen to. In the guise of a Brahmin, Krishna went to Kabir's house. He called to his mother and told her what had happened. He said Kabir sat in the bazaar, and the customers came and asked the price of the scarf, but he would not reply to them and kept silent. A great number of customers came, but he could give them no reply. But bringing husband of Sita to his mind, he continued his worship. When the whole bazaar was empty, he called to a Brahmin, tore his scarf in half, gave it to him. Mother. A fakir then called for the remainder of the garment. Kabir at once gave him the other half of the scarf. He saw there an empty house and is seated there now, performing his worship. I saw from a distance what was happening, and have hastened here to tell you. It is the earnest wish of my heart that you may be prospered. But mother, Kabir will not put his mind to worldly affairs. As the dweller in the heaven, Vaikunt said this. Kabir's mother grew very angry. She said to herself, when he comes home, I will give him a sound beating. As the delight of mind, Ram, heard her say this, he exclaimed, he will not come home quickly. After a scorpion has completed its wrongdoing by stinging, it hides itself in some other place. Come along with me, I will show you where he is sitting. Then taking the old woman by the hand, Krishna walked rapidly with her. Both soon arrived where Kabir was seated. Repeating the names of God, the life of the world pointed him out to the old woman from a distance. From the house in which Kabir was seated, there issued the sound of Ram's name. Just as Narad seated the Muni Valmiki for the purpose of repeating the name of Ram, or as Sita sat in Ashoka forest with love worshipped Ram, or as Jatayu worshipped Ram when harassed by Ravan. In the same manner Kabir sat, and bringing the form of Sri Ram into his imagination, with his lips he sang praises of Ram. Having lost his self-consciousness, losing all thought of whether he was honored or dishonored, losing all pride of public recognition, losing all thought of objects of sense, he continued singing the praises of Ram with his lips. Just then his mother entered the house. A lord of the heaven, Vaikunt, pointed Kabir out from a distance. He then stood outside, saw the amusing scene of Bhakt Kabir. The mother said to Kabir, bring the scarf and show it to me. If you do not bring it at once, I shall punish you. He would, however, give her no reply. Keeping his mind steady in the worship of Ram, he did not recognize the fact that his mother and a noble Brahmin had arrived. His mind was entirely taken up with the form and name of God, and so he lost all self-consciousness. His mother became angry and said to her son, in a stupid manner, "You sitting here loving, worshipping Ram?" Hearing her say this, the Lord of the heaven Vaikunth said to old woman, "You have used harsh language with your lips, but you have love for him in your heart. Now take a cane in your hand and punish your son." Hearing him say this, Kabir's mother said, "I see nothing with which to whip him." God then produced a cane, put it in her hand. Growing angry, she struck Kabir on his back, but he had no bodily consciousness. Being lost in the worship of Ram, he continued to strike Kabir on his back. Sri Hari stood outside, trembling with pain. He said to her, "You're beating your child, but the welt appears on my back. Now that beating is quite sufficient." So said the dark complexioned one. Just as when the edge of an axe strikes the root of a tree, the tree violently trembles, so as she continued punishing Bhakt Kabir, the savior of the world trembled. Or as when a child is troubled by some bad person, his mother suffers the pain, so as she continued whipping Kabir with the cane, God trembled with pain. Or as when an army lessens in the number, a king becomes depressed, so when this God-loving Bhakt was being troubled, it was this one, the merciful to the lowly, who trembled with pain. Or as when a young deer is caught in a trap, the mother deer feels the pain, so in the whipping of his Bhakt, God trembled with pain. Or as when the sea saw the Rishi Agast, it trembled in its heart, so the dweller in the heaven Vaikunth trembled with pain as mother continued to beat Kabir. Finally, the husband of Rukmani exclaimed, "That is sufficient now, O mother." And then the infinite one added, "I went to trouble Bali. I ended in being his doorkeeper. So in the end, my deception had its positive result. I have had many noble and pious bhaktas, but no one has ever given me a beating. Now I recognize the fact that Bhakt Kabir is superior to myself." Then said the husband of Sita to himself, "I must show him my visible form, because I troubled him in the guise of a Brahmin, so he did not recognize me." So he cast aside his Brahmin guise, and in his hand took his bow and arrow. A dazzling crown adorned his head. His large eyes gave brightness to his face. In his ears were the most brilliant earrings. His chest was broad, but his waist was slender. Around his neck was the purest of jewels. The Kaustumb and the Vajayanti garland adorned his neck. Around his waist was an embroidered yellow garment. On his feet were the Vanki and Todar ornaments. The husband of Janki thus presented himself together with Sita. Kabir opened his eyes and looked. It was as if 1,000,000,000 of suns had risen. Seeing such a form as that, he embraced his feet. The dweller in Vaikunth then said, "You have stood by my test. I shall never forget you." Just as a mother never forgets her child, just as experts pierce coins with their instruments and then string them together, or as they test diamonds by hammering them on the anvil and then store them in the treasury, so I have put you to the test. Now I will put you in the depths of my heart, always looking on you with eye of favor. So spoke God. The life of the world then gave Kabir's mother a loving embrace and said, "Your good fortune, because of me, can never be fully described." As God said this, the mother felt great joy. She drew Kabir to her heart, gave him a caress of love. Said she to him, "It is because of you have become my son that I have had sight of Shri Ram." The mother then took Kabir by the hand and led him back to their home. And the husband of Sita said to them, "Keep thoughts of me in your heart." Thus keeping, the life of world became invisible. And with these words, we would pause story of Sant Kabir here, with a promise that we'll be back in the next capsule to you some more interesting episodes, happenings from the life of great Sant Kabir. With those words, it is goodbye, good luck from this Bhagwan Ki Baatein YouTube channel. Sadar Pranam.